He says that one day, so it was customary for the believers, when Baha'u'llah was freed from prison, or before he went to the prison, in different towns, whether it was in Adrianople, whether it was in Baghdad, whether it was in Akka even. That sometimes the believers would invite Baha'u'llah, and occasionally he would accept that invitation to go and visit them. And there, of course, they would prepare a food or a simple tea or something. Even in the barracks of Akka, in the very prison of Akka, when restrictions were relaxed in that prison, the believers who had their quarters in separate places, they sometimes would put together all the little rations they had, and they would prepare a very nice, or relatively nice, shall we say, refreshments, and would beg Baha'u'llah to come to them and take part in that. And Baha'u'llah sometimes would accept and would go. One of these believers says that when he was in Akka, when he was in Bahji, Baha'u'llah accepted their invitation to come to their little room. And one day he came. And then after some time that he sat there and he talked, and then he went back. And he said, as Baha'u'llah left our place, he said, he told us not to follow him. He said, stay where you are. And he and some of those who were accompanying him went. He said, I looked from the back of Baha'u'llah, and I saw the majesty, which is indescribable majesty. An indescribable majesty that he could not describe it from the back. In fact, some people see the majesty of a person from his back. I know that. My wife does that anyhow. She is very much in love with the picture of Abdul-Baha that you can see his back. And he thinks, she loves that picture more than anything else. To see the majesty of a walk. This man says, I saw the majesty of Baha'u'llah. And he says to himself, oh, I wish the kings and rulers were here to see that majesty. The next day when he goes into the presence of Baha'u'llah, this man, when Baha'u'llah, as soon as Baha'u'llah sees him and tells him to be seated, he turns to him and he said, if the kings and rulers come today here, who would let you in this place? There would be no room for you here. You people wouldn't be allowed to come here then. If the kings and rulers were coming into the faith, who would let you in? He says, this is your day. This is the day of the meek and the humble. He says the kings and rulers will come in the future. So really and truly, we must thank Baha'u'llah for having given us this great revelation and has enabled us to recognize him in this day. It's a great, great bounty. The more you think of it, the more you look at the history of the faith, the history of his revelation, the more you realize what a great day it is and what a bounty which is indescribable that he has given to us. So now you know whose words you're reading. You can see a little bit of the ocean. That like the drop who saw the ocean. If you really dwell upon these subjects, read the dispensation of Baha'u'llah, read those few pages at the back of the Advent of Divine Justice, read the history of his revelation, we get a little glimpse of that. It's entirely up to us. Whenever we are moved, we say a prayer. You can now stand up and say a prayer here. That's all right. Or go home and say a prayer whenever you like it. But the obligatory prayers is a law of Baha'u'llah, and we must say it in the manner which is prescribed. And it is this which makes it sound to us as foreign. Because Baha'u'llah has enjoined upon us certain genuflections in this prayer, in this rite. As you know, there are 3 types of obligatory prayers, or 4 types really. 3 of them are for the living, and 1 of them is for the dead. One of the obligatory prayers, which we say for the dead, in which there is a refrain, there are some refrains that you keep on repeating. That's an obligatory prayer. It's not just an ordinary prayer. If there is a Baha'i funeral, that is a must. The others, doesn't matter if you say a prayer, other prayers or not, it doesn't matter. But that is an essential part of the ritual of burying the dead, of the funeral. Baha'u'llah has forbidden the saying of obligatory prayers in public. You have to say it in private, in the privacy of your own room. Whereas that of the dead, that for the dead, you can say it in public. The obligatory prayers, as you know, there are 3 of them. One of them is the long obligatory prayer, which is a very beautiful prayer. And one of them is the medium one, and one of them is the short one. The long one, of course, you say it once in every 24 hours. The medium one, you say it 3 times a day, certain times, morning, noon, night. The shortest one, which is the simplest of all, really, it's a very simple thing, and Baha'u'llah, through his bounty, has been very, very kind to us. To some businessmen who are so busy they have no time for these things, they can say it at noon if they remember it. And he says if they forgot it, they could go up to sunset. So it's quite a good extension for them. It's only 2 lines. You remember that. And there is no genuflections either. But it is an obligatory prayer. It's one of the rituals of the faith. But the other ones have some genuflections. Now there are conditions for saying the obligatory prayer, as I said. One of the conditions is that you must be alone. Why must you be alone? You will see in a few minutes when I explain this to you. When we talk about these genuflections, these actions that you do, that really this is a place for doing it between you and your God. There can be no other person there. Because there you are going to prostrate yourself in front of your God. You see? And you are going to confess throughout the whole of the prayer to our own shortcomings, to our sins, to our transgressions, to our remoteness from Him. Beg Him to bring us close to Him. And these are the things which are very private. The only occasion that I would consider, and this is my personal view and experience, that you can say it when there is somebody else there, is when your children are there. I feel parents should say the obligatory prayers in front of their children, so that they take it as an example. We learnt it anyhow as Baha'i children. When most people who have been brought up in the East, in Baha'i families, you will ask them, they say, yes, when I was 10 years of age, I memorized it because I've heard it so much every day. It becomes a part of you then. One of the conditions for saying the obligatory prayers is that you must turn your face towards the Qibla, which is the shrine of Baha'u'llah. The whole world turns to Him. It's the tremendous thought that all mankind, and eventually the whole of the human race, one day, when they all recognize Him, they all will turn, just like to the hub of the wheel, you know, everyone. And this brings unity. Everyone turns to the shrine of Baha'u'llah, wherever you are. Now these genuflections that must go with it, with the long and the medium obligatory prayers, they are symbolic. Baha'u'llah has tried to add to our words, which are, for instance, you're supplicating to God something. Supplicating means you're begging Him to do something for you. And He has introduced these symbolic actions. You raise your hand when you supplicate to God. When you want to express your humility to Him, utter humility and utter nothingness to who? To God, to your Creator. Not to man, but to Creator. That's why you're alone. You prostrate yourself before your God. And you say those words indicating your utter nothingness and your humility before Him. And that raises our consciousness with these actions. of what we are really saying to our God. We are doing it, we are showing it in action. It heightens one's consciousness of the words, provided we can understand this. Well, so you see how important this is to us. The obligatory prayers, to become used to become familiar with it, and knowing it's not something which is done in the public, but you do it in private. Baha'u'llah and Abdul-Baha have told us that if the believers do not say their obligatory prayers, they can never get close to Baha'u'llah. No matter what else you do, this is one of those conditions. And we Baha'is in the West have to become used to this. I know some people in the West now, at least the countries that I've been familiar with, particularly in Ireland. I know many, many believers in Ireland. I know believers who will never go to bed unless, even if it's midnight, dead tired, and the woman or man thinks he hasn't said his prayers, obligatory prayers, he says now, he must say it. With this we can grow. So you see, this is another point which I wanted to bring up. For we were trying to enable our faith to grow, wasn't it? The whole idea was to see what should we do that our faith may grow. Well, this is the second step, really. Or the first step. This should be the first step. And reciting the writings become the second step. But they are of similar nature. Now prayers, we can say when you like it. And then comes the study of the writings. Now study of the writings and reciting the writings are two different things. We must not confuse them. Because when you recite the writings in the morning and in the evening, you are really taking your personal food, your spiritual food. Although you learn from it as well, I'm sure you learn a lot of things. But the purpose of it is not to learn things. When you're reciting the words, the purpose is to receive the spiritual food. This is the communication receiving from your Creator. And you are eating your spiritual food. But studying of the writings is a different thing. You have to sit down, take a book, read the writings, see what it says, what it means. Read another book to understand this part that you don't understand. Ask from somebody a question, what does this mean? Read the history of the faith. Join these things together, go and make research, ask from people, take part in seminars. This is where we study the writings. And the more we do that, the study of the writings will enable us to see more and more of the greatness of that ocean I was telling you. The ocean of the revelation of Baha'u'llah. If you want to see that ocean like the drop did, you remember the drop of the rain when it saw the ocean. If you want to see that, you have to study the writings. And one of the very important things we must study are the words of Shoghi Effendi. Because Shoghi Effendi plays a very, very significant part in the revelation of Baha'u'llah. And I will explain to you what his position is in relation to the words. It's a very significant role that he has played. If you had been a very knowledgeable Baha'i, now I had seen some very knowledgeable Baha'is who had come from the East, who had read great many of the writings of Baha'u'llah. And by the way, let me say this much, that I don't think there is anybody in the world, anybody who can say he has read all the writings of Baha'u'llah and Abdul-Baha and Shoghi Effendi. We certainly do not have such a person. You can't keep it in your mind anyhow, except Mr. Anderson. He has got all the indexing done, and he's marvelous, really marvelous. But you'll forget it, and you read it, and you will have to... there's nobody who can say he has read everything. I was so delighted to see Ted here. I'd met him about 12 years ago in Canada, and it was a very beautiful experience to go and see him. And now it was great joy to see him at the airport when I arrived. You know, I'm going to miss you all when I'm going there to Europe. How am I going to do it? I don't know. It's such a beautiful experience to come and meet with all the beautiful faces here, and it was a great privilege and joy for me to see today some of your early believers, the first believer and the first native believer. you do not realize who they are. Of course, they are the most humble servants of Baha'u'llah. But you know, history will record this in the future. And I'm sure the historians will want to know who were these people, what were they like, what they were doing. And the same thing with all of you, with all pioneers in every town, those who pioneer from town to town. And they go there and establish the foundation of the community. In the future, they are not going to find out who were our politicians and our great figures in history, as we call them today. These days that we are going through are the darkest period in the history of mankind. You realize this? The darkest period that ever was or that ever shall be is the period that now we are in it, and we shall be in it for quite a few years. The darkest period of man's life. And people will not want to know who were these people who were running for election. You run in here for elections. In England, they stand for elections. You know that. This is the difference. You run, and there they stand for it. But anyhow, all these things will be considered as so much part of the old order. But what will be remembered is the wonderful band, a small band or a lonely person of Baha'is who have been in localities and places and towns, villages, far, far remote areas of the world, trying to build up, and they built up eventually, and we will build up great, great institutions for mankind. And then they want to know who are these people? Who were these people? And if they find a little scrap of paper, if they ever come across it that there is a little information about that, they are going to grab it from each other to know something about you people. So really we are very, very privileged to be inheriting the kingdom of God, the weak and the humble, inheriting this great kingdom. Well, we are talking of other things now. The time is coming to an end, and I feel that we should consider these 2 points that I have mentioned today about our ways by which we can grow spiritually, get closer to Baha'u'llah. And if you are going to be with us tomorrow, I'm going to say something to you that, and I'll leave it with you to think about it, that if you read the writings, and if you say your prayers in this way, the obligatory prayers, and turn to Baha'u'llah, this is not going to be sufficient. We have to do other things. This is not the end of it. We have to do other things as well. And particularly, I'm going to mention something tomorrow, which if you don't do it, then all the things that you've done will be of no use. And these things are so close together. Now, don't let it be a cliffhanger or something till tomorrow, but let us wait, and we hope that we can continue in this series. There are some questions people have asked in here which are not considered, which is not part of this, but I want to also bring up some other points as well, which is not to do with this, how we enable our faith to grow, but other subjects which are part of it again. And we hopefully will bring it up tomorrow. Now, there is only 10 minutes left, or something like that. And I think you should say something now, if you want to. If there is any questions or some points that you want to raise. Yes?
Well, because we've gone all the way without questions, I have to do 1 more than 25. Could you explain a little more what you mean by praying without desire? I came across your statement on that, and I mean, you wrote very similar to what you're saying now. And I never understood that. In fact, up until that point, I thought, gee, well, here it is. I've never seen it all laid out so well, how you actually acquire Baha'i characteristics of what Baha'i acquires sort of thing. So I read that. And I said, well,
no, you see...
Praying without desire. Well, I don't know what that means. So
now, I'll explain this to you as best as I can. First of all, you can pray in any way. We mostly, when we pray, we want something. You're in difficulties, you pray. And Baha'u'llah, in fact, and Abdul-Baha have left for us many such prayers in which we read and we beg God for various things. But what I was trying to say was that if a person grows spiritually and becomes more and more closer to Baha'u'llah, he reaches a point that he doesn't want anything for himself. It's not something that you must do it now, but it's a matter of growth. That all that you want is to praise God. All that you want is to turn to Him, is to glorify Him. But it's only a matter of growth. It is not a matter of compulsion that now, from now on, we must go and pray without any desire. We can't do it. And this is why Baha'u'llah and Abdul-Baha have known our weaknesses. And all these prayers that you have, which says, oh God, I am in need, I am in this way, I am in that way, give me this, give me that. It's all because of our weaknesses. That when you become stronger, you don't want anything but the cause of God to grow, but to get closer to God. And this is the meaning of prayer without desire.
That's what I was wondering. Desire in the sense of desiring the presence of God.
Yes.
That's not what you're talking about.
No.
Desiring the nearness of God is
Yes.
always something.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Is it permissible to instruct children on the obligatory prayers like in a children's class?
Well, surely you can teach them, but they are not obliged to say it. They cannot say it until, or they shouldn't say it until they are 15. The age of 15 is an age in which Baha'is will attain the age which becomes binding on them to carry out the laws of Baha'u'llah. But it's a good thing for them to know that they can say it, they must say it when they grow older. Now how you can instruct them, yes, but they must know it's not a part of their life then until they become 15. There and then here. I'll just...
Could you finish up briefly why we should read the writings of Shoghi Effendi?
Oh yes, that was a subject I meant to say and I forgot it. But it's too late now. Well, I'll mention... Right. That's an important thing. Let us finish that one. Would you like me to do this? Yes. You see, this is a very important point. I said I've met many believers who were very deep in the faith, who had read the writings of Baha'u'llah, as many as they could find. So much they have read practically all the writings of Abdul-Baha. They have known all the history of the faith. They were the most erudite Baha'is we could have, the most knowledgeable. But they really didn't understand the faith. Until Shoghi Effendi came in. Now, the best way I can explain it to you is like this. If you read all the writings of Baha'u'llah and Abdul-Baha alone, and all the history of the faith, you will not understand the faith, necessarily. I will give you this example. You see, Baha'u'llah, have you seen these boxes which you give to children as gift called jigsaw puzzles? Now, when you look at the jigsaw puzzle, you will find it has a lot of pieces in it. And as you look at each piece is valid, isn't it? It's valid piece. It's valid, it's truth. It's good, it's right. But you look at each piece, they are not related to each other so much. And so you have a box full of items which are right and good and valid. But where is that picture? Now the faith is like that. Baha'u'llah and Abdul-Baha have given us all the truths that we want to have. All the truth of this faith they have brought for us. They have given to us like this box, full of it. Now, the function of Shoghi Effendi during the 36 years of his ministry was to put this together for us and give us a picture of what it is all about, relate them together. He related all that Baha'u'llah and Abdul-Baha had brought together and said, this is the Baha'i faith. Now, he never added one dot to the... Now, this is one thing that some of the friends may not realize. People think that Shoghi Effendi has given us his own views in the faith and added so many things to it. Not at all. Shoghi Effendi has not added one dot to the revelation of Baha'u'llah. All that he has done, he has explained to us, elucidated that as the interpreter of the Word of God, applied it for us. He put together really all that the faith had. He explained to us the function of various elements in the faith, the relationships together, how the laws should be applied, how the teachings should be applied. This is his function. And therefore, not until you read the writings of Shoghi Effendi can you fully appreciate the faith. This is why I said that we had great learned men during the heroic age of the faith, before Shoghi Effendi comes into the scene, who had known all the writing, or some of the writings, a great deal of it. They were very learned people, beautiful people, very spiritual giants, as I call them, really. But really, when you look at it, they had not understood the whole perspective of the faith. In its perspective, they hadn't seen it. And it was Shoghi Effendi who gave it to us. And to me, this is the greatest task that he performed for us. He put together what Baha'u'llah and Abdul-Baha brought to us. He formed it, he showed it to us, and he said, this is it. And he gave us the pattern. Now, this is why I feel it's so important for us, if we want to understand the faith, to read his writings. Half of his writings are in English, and half of it are in Persian. But what you have in English is quite sufficient to give us his guidance, and then you can read the... But so you know, really, when you become a Baha'i, you enter into a field, of a vast field, which has no end to it. No Baha'i can say, well, I have exhausted it now, I'm glad I'm finished, I'm going to retire. You can't do that. As long as we live, we still have scope to read the writings of Baha'u'llah and understand a little bit of it, read the writings of Abdul-Baha, read the writings of Shoghi Effendi, read the history of the faith. And I can literally tell you, if you want to take it seriously, you have no time to read anything else. You won't have the time to read the books that people write about the faith either. You won't have the right time. It's impossible to read all the books that people write about the faith. You can't do that. You have no time for it. You have no time unless in the future again a machinery is created for us which can condense all things in one flash and push it into your mind. Maybe this is something in the future people might do it for us. But I cannot believe that you can do all of this. It's impossible to read all these writings and then try to see what other people think of. And then there is another aspect to it, the writings. And I mention this to you, and some of you may be surprised to hear this. If you read the writings of Baha'u'llah and Abdul-Baha and Shoghi Effendi, you don't need to read anything else. You will understand everything. And of course, I'm not saying you shouldn't learn science and technology. Baha'u'llah says we must learn science and technology and all the sciences and arts. But all those knowledges that people acquire, which begins with word and ends with word, will be useless for you. Because here have all the answers to every question that you want is here. And maybe tomorrow we will also talk about this aspect of knowledge and learning a little bit. So now I think we must close the session really because of the time is so short. But maybe we can...
I have two alternatives. One, the seeming contradiction, if you go to the sales committee and buy a ring, the right price, with the buying some symbol, sometimes in the package you get a little folded up instruction guide in one hand of the car how to wear this and so on. I think I read the little thing, but anyway, your right hand. If you read, I'm not sure it's Abdul-Baha or whether it's the West or something, but Abdul-Baha says in the left hand because it's closest to the heart. Do you think this is bad translation?
So what is the heart? What is closest to the heart? I didn't hear it.
The little finger on the left hand.
Oh yeah.
Closest to the heart.
Well, yes, these are probably the things. I think these are not essential things at this present time for us to go and follow. There are some things which will gradually become established when the House of Justice finds us the time they'll instruct us and all these things. These are secondary things. Well, friends, I hope that you haven't been very tired today. I'll collect all these. If you had also cared, you could write some of your questions would be all right. I can collect them in here, and this way I could maybe formulate it in the talks tomorrow. I understand that some of you may not be here on Monday, so that we will try tomorrow to bring in a good deal of the things which I feel may be of some help, if it is of any help. So, with your permission, we'll end up this meeting. No, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, friends, your love and your beautiful faces have so affected me since yesterday that I feel moved to pray to Baha'u'llah that this community may become a jewel in the whole Baha'i world, really, because you are jewels. I mentioned yesterday or day before how much the early believers at the time of Baha'u'llah would have longed to see one of you who have embraced his faith in the Western world, especially in all these remote areas. And I know that your country has a great destiny. Someone was telling us at the National Assembly meeting here that the people of this country, and probably Ireland, are the people who will, the countries who will bring great numbers into the faith in the Western world. And I hope very much that this will happen. You know, the powers of earth and heaven are working for us to promote the faith, provided we rise and provided we turn to Baha'u'llah. Once we turn to ourselves, then nothing will happen. Once you rely on yourself, nothing will happen. But if you turn to him and rely on him and bring him with you, then all kinds of things will happen. And time is short, really. The world is set for great upheavals and sufferings which will encompass mankind. And during this short period of time, we have to prepare ourselves for the time that great numbers are going to knock on our doors in the middle of the night and tell us, now we know what you were saying. Please tell us what should we do. We have to prepare ourselves for that day, because that day will come. You know, the world conditions will deteriorate. There is no doubt about it. This is what Baha'u'llah has said over 100 years ago. Baha'u'llah said that if the believers, if his believers, those of his time who had recognized him, if they had carried out his teachings with absolute sincerity and faithfulness, then the whole world, the great majority of the world, would have recognized Baha'u'llah in his day. But this did not happen. And so now we have to bear the consequences of mankind's failure to recognize him, and the leaders of the world the message of Baha'u'llah fell on deaf ears when they received it. All of these consequences will result in the breaking up of this old order. And day by day, as Baha'u'llah has mentioned, day by day, the conditions will become worse. It's not something which will become worse month by month, but day by day. That today will be worse than yesterday. And this is our experience also. We can see it with our own eyes. From every point of view. Morally, spiritually, socially, economically, politically. The society will break up and is breaking up at a terrific speed until what Baha'u'llah has said will become fulfilled. And then he said that suddenly, he uses the word suddenly, suddenly that will happen which will cause the limbs of mankind to quake. That is a tremendous upheaval which will face us all. And from what Shoghi Effendi has written, it's not going to be a small thing. The limbs of mankind, the whole human society will quake. And then Baha'u'llah gives us the vision of what happens after that. Immediately after that. And not after that, but immediately after. Because he says, then and only then. Then and only then. I paraphrase his words, will the divine standard be unfurled. And the nightingales will warble their melodies. Which means, there and only then, the cause of God will be widespread over the world. It will be proclaimed and great numbers will come into the faith. We have to prepare ourselves for that day. And our institutions which we are building today are going to be those institutions which are going to guide humanity. As torches, he says, these will become beacons of light which will guide humanity at the time of its greatest peril. Now, we are not going to go into this subject now. I didn't mean to talk about this particular aspect. And we know that the institutions of the faith, the cause of God, is protected in all these calamities and sufferings which are to happen. And I believe, and Shoghi Effendi has in fact indicated these things, I believe very firmly that if any believer dedicates himself fully to the progress of the cause, for the advancements of the faith, God will protect him. I'm not saying that we should now go and teach the faith so that we may save our neck in the future difficulties. This is not at all the right motive, not far from it. I'm saying this. God will protect the believers so that those who are steadfast in the cause and dedicate yourself. You know, the early believers that I met when I was young, if I tell you this, you may not believe this. They had the power of life and death in their own hands. They had reached to such powers. God had given them such powers that they had the power of life and death. And they used it to protect, to propagate the faith, to enlarge its institutions and its society, communities. This is because they had faith. If you have faith to that extent that we have faith, our powers will be to that extent of your faith. And Baha'u'llah mentions those who have been, who have become detached from the things of this world. And when you become detached, you know, it means that you will become attached to Baha'u'llah. And that's the meaning of it, really. The only barrier we have between us and Baha'u'llah is our attachment to the things of this world. Once we become detached from it, then we will find that the powers of Baha'u'llah will descend upon us. And this is when things will happen. Well, friends, I don't want to talk about this subject at all, but as I said, the marvelous spirit which is created in this meeting, I feel it from yourselves, from you people. And I know that when I return back, I shall be very much uplifted by having met you and having come to your presence. I want to continue the subject we were discussing yesterday. Now, I'm not going to repeat what I have said yesterday, that I feel that those of you who are here, maybe you who are not here, probably you have to bear with me somehow. You remember the 2 points which so far we discussed. And for the soul to grow and to develop and to become closer to Baha'u'llah, for the spirit of faith, when we talked about the spirit of faith, to grow day by day, so that our faith becomes stronger day by day, stronger, so that Baha'u'llah's words become fulfilled when he expects of us that our tomorrow is better than our today. And we pointed out 1 or 2 points that we could help ourselves. And this was the way that Baha'u'llah himself had shown us. We talked about the saying of obligatory prayers, the significance of it. We said how much that the saying of the obligatory prayer makes the soul humble. Really, when you read it carefully and in the presence of God, in the privacy of your own chamber, you read that and you see how humble we become. We become like that drop which I was mentioning yesterday, seeing the ocean. And then great powers can descend on the soul. And then when we read the writings of Baha'u'llah, and we talked about what the writings consisted of, so different from prayers, then great powers again will come. But that's not enough. You know, the story of religion is the story of love. When you say you are a Baha'i, you means that we are in love with Baha'u'llah. This is the meaning of it. It's a love story. It's not a story of knowledge. Forget about knowledge. Knowledge is a problem, quite frankly. And we probably talk about this. I'll make sure that I'll talk about this sometime today to you. But love for God, love for Baha'u'llah. We are created to be the lovers. You know, this is the function of man, is to be a lover. And to the extent that we are a lover, to that extent we can enjoy life and we can enjoy living in accordance with the teachings. Now, to be a Baha'i means you are a lover of Baha'u'llah. And of course, loving is a relative term. It varies from person to person. We are at different levels here. When you love somebody, the sign of love, a real love, is that you are ready and willing and really longing to do what your beloved asks you to do. Isn't that right? This is a true love I'm talking about. I'm not talking of superficial love that we think somebody may think he has for somebody else. You know, the real love. When you have a real love, you don't want anything for yourself. You realize this? And if you ever want anything for yourself, it means that you are not in love with that person. Now, if you say, oh yes, I love this person because, oh, he's very rich and he's got a cars and houses and business, I love him. This is not love, this is selfishness, you see. But a real love is when you don't want anything for yourself, but you want everything for your beloved. Now here we come to a very important point. When we become a Baha'i, and when we love Baha'u'llah, we want to do everything he has asked us to do, to carry out his teachings. And this is a very important point. If I say I love him but I don't carry out his teachings, then it means it's no use. I read the writings, what's the use of it? I say my prayers but I don't obey Baha'u'llah. You see how these things are related together? How one follows the other? You remember yesterday I was telling you it's something like you have to close all the switches which are in series, one after the other, and if one of them is open, no current can go through. You have to close all the switches. Now this is it.
we have to be willing and ready and joyous and longing to carry out his teachings. And his teachings is not purely, and his laws, the laws that he has given to us. Now in the Western world, we don't have many laws. Our laws are very few that Baha'u'llah has now given to us. The time will come in the future that we have to carry out more laws, which he has enjoined upon us. But the laws that he has given to us are so few. I mean, I will count them for you. We can count it with the fingers of your hand. Do you know what the first law of Baha'u'llah is, which we are asked to carry out? The most important of these laws? It's a law. And law has precedence over anything else. If there is a law, and if there is a teaching or a saying, the preference comes to the law of Baha'u'llah. I mentioned yesterday, if there was a choice between reading the writings of Baha'u'llah and saying the obligatory prayers, we say the obligatory prayers because it's the law of Baha'u'llah. Now the first and the most important law of Baha'u'llah is the saying of obligatory prayers and fasting. It's required of us. And he mentions, Abdul-Baha also mentions, that if we do not do that, we will not be able to get close to him. There is a barrier already. And we have to make this a habit. Let us, all of us here, as our chairman was saying, really determine and try it. I would suggest, and this is of course, I'm mentioning this to the new Baha'is, because the older Baha'is are familiar with this. But I'm mentioning this to newer Baha'is. Let us try this for 3 months. Do it regularly. And regularly read the writings, and then you forget about it. Just remember it for 3 months. That's enough. Then forget about it. All will work out then. You will find it becomes a beautiful picture. You try it. You try it and see how one's life will change. Now, yes, we must, just reading the laws of Baha'u'llah, I was talking about. The fasting, obligatory prayers, the law of marriage, Baha'i marriage, I'm sure you're all familiar with. The law of prohibition of the drinking of alcohol is one of the laws of Baha'u'llah, which is binding on us. It is time that now, in the Western world, we are able, as Baha'is, and especially the young Baha'is, to stand erect, well-oriented, strong people who will stand up in the public and say, I will not drink because Baha'u'llah has forbidden it. And the same thing applies to the taking of drugs. These are the things we have to be frank with people who become Baha'is and tell them this. They have every right to know this. And then the other one is the question of sexual relations outside marriage. It's forbidden by Baha'u'llah. Outside marriage, before and after. Marriage, he has enjoined upon us. And it is not compulsory, but it's a marvelous thing. When I was about 10 or 12 years ago in Ireland, we had about 150, 200 people became Baha'is in one town. Young people, young men and young women. They became beautiful Baha'is, strong Baha'is. And they all scattered. We asked them to scatter throughout the country. And now they are the people who have built up the foundations of of all the communities we have there. We have now in the south of Ireland 20 local assemblies. And these people have become the foundations of these assemblies. They have pioneered. All of them spread around. And they live recognizing our impotence and our utter nothingness and our humility then you have the makings of a spiritual giant. Servitude, you see, is the greatest station that God has destined for man. There is no greater station than the station of servitude for man. In fact, there are 3 stations, he says, in the world. The station of God, which is above us, the station of the manifestations of God, which is above us, and the station of man is that of servitude. Servitude. And Abdul-Baha was the true servant. No person on this earth will ever reach him as low as that in servitude. Because when you go in servitude, you go down, further down, not up. You cannot be a servant and have ambition to become somebody. There is no station for anybody in this faith. And this is a great protection for all of us. If you want to think of a station for somebody, servitude. To be low, to be... Abdul-Baha says, make me a dust in the path of thy loved ones. This is true. A dust in the path of loved ones. If ever somebody thinks of saying I, this is a very bad word to use, I. Or my. It's really a bad word. It's the word which has caused all the troubles in the world. But utter nothingness come to us when we see the great ocean of revelation of Baha'u'llah. You cannot artificially become humble. And humility come only to us when we see the greatness of the revelation of Baha'u'llah. Now Abdul-Baha became that embodiment of servitude. And he himself begged Baha'u'llah to give him that station when he was a child. When Abdul-Baha was a child of about 10 years of age in Baghdad, he had recognized the station of his father. And I mentioned that he recognized it, really recognized who he was. We haven't recognized him. We cannot recognize him. We can only recognize him to a limited degree. Abdul-Baha's recognition and the recognition of the Bab as to the station of Baha'u'llah was so complete that it is beyond us. You know that often people think that because Abdul-Baha was the son of Baha'u'llah, well, you know how it is between the father and the son. There is always an intimate relationship of intimacy and there is no conventions there. You know, at home when you're alone, you're just very, very relaxed and absolutely free, and there is no restrictions. You're a member of a family, and this is your father, and this is the son, and who knows what the sons these days do to their fathers, and vice versa. But anyhow, we have a very, very intimate relationship. And some people may think that Abdul-Baha had the same relationship with his father. Well, he didn't. Although there was this love between them, naturally. But Abdul-Baha had so recognized the station of Baha'u'llah as being the Lord of Lords, as being the manifestation, the supreme manifestation of God, that he considered himself as his humblest servant. He would never, in the ordinary time when everybody was out of the house, he would never give himself the liberty of suddenly walking into the room of Baha'u'llah. He would not go in without getting permission, without prostrating himself at his feet. You see, he had recognized him who he was. It wasn't his heavenly, it wasn't his earthly father. It was God revealed to man. He had recognized that. We haven't recognized it. And therefore he knew what humility meant towards his father. You have heard many stories of Abdul-Baha approaching the house in which his father was living, for instance, in the mansion of Bahji. When Abdul-Baha was in Akka and he was in the Bahji, you have heard of that story, I'm sure many of you. He used to ride his donkey to go from Akka to the mansion of Bahji. But as soon as he saw the mansion from distance, he would dismount from his donkey, because it is in the conventions of the East, and one of the signs of respect towards your Lord, if you are a servant of somebody, you never go riding to your servant. You must to your Lord. If you are a servant, you never ride to go to see your Lord. You always walk. And so Abdul-Baha would dismount from his donkey as a respect towards Just as soon as he saw from 1 mile distance the mansion of Bahji, he would dismount. He would walk. He said he would never go riding to his Lord. And then Baha'u'llah, what a love he had towards Abdul-Baha. The outpouring of love and adoration that he had for him was something again out of this world. He often, when he would hear that Abdul-Baha is coming to the mansion of Bahji, for example, as soon as he would hear, he would make the whole household and everyone who was around there to be vigilant to see when the master is arriving from distance, and he would send all the men who were there, every person, to go as a welcoming party a mile or two ahead. The master is coming, he said. And he himself would stand on the balcony watching, waiting for the master to come. And those who were with him, usually the female members of the household or some of the disciples who were there, women disciples and who were in that household, he would look to them and say, look at the master, look at the way he walks, look at his majesty, look at his powers, you see. Now this is a love relationship between the two, but one is the Lord and one is the servant. Now one, Baha'u'llah, you can consider him like a summit of a lofty mountain. And Abdul-Baha, the lowest servant, the lowest valley. The lowest valley. No one can reach him as low as that. The lowest valley down there. And then when the water pours down from the top of the mountain, where does it accumulate? It accumulates in the lowest valley. And this is how Abdul-Baha, you see, one of the distinguishing features of this revelation, and this you have all studied, the covenant, one of the distinguishing features of this revelation is that Baha'u'llah has brought his revelation for us. But unlike the prophets of the past, he never gave it to us. He brought it for us, but he didn't give it to us, his revelation. He gave them to Abdul-Baha. This is the meaning of the covenant. All the forces of the revelation of Baha'u'llah, all the forces that he released for 40 years of his ministry, he poured it within the person of Abdul-Baha. Abdul-Baha became the reservoir of the revelation of Baha'u'llah. It's like this glass in here. This glass contains all the water that is therein. See? Abdul-Baha became a container. Baha'u'llah had brought for us two things in this dispensation, and not more and not less. One was his revelation, and one was the person of Abdul-Baha. And these two things is all that God has given to mankind in this age. And Abdul-Baha became here like a container of the revelation of Baha'u'llah. And although he did not have the powers, although he was not a manifestation of God, he had the powers of the manifestation of God conferred upon him by virtue of containing all that revelation within him. And so what did Baha'u'llah tell us? He says to us this. This is his message. This is the gist of the covenant. He says, everything I have brought for you is with Abdul-Baha. Go and get it from him. It is nowhere else. Outside Abdul-Baha, nothing exists. It's within him. This is the meaning of the covenant. So you see, because he really received the revelation of Baha'u'llah on behalf of all humanity. And held it there. And protected it. Just like a wall that you put around an ocean. And it was an ocean of revelation. And that wall, many people tried to break through. The covenant breakers during his ministry. You should study that turbulent history of the faith during those 29 years. They tried to break through this great wall of this ocean and to get to this water of life. But Abdul-Baha and a few of the believers who rallied around him like lions, they protected this covenant, this cause. And so they couldn't break through. And today, of course, it's a different story. That wall of the covenant is so strong that it'll be foolish to think anybody can even think in terms of breaking through it. It's a tremendous revelation, really. And Abdul-Baha and Baha'u'llah here have this reciprocal goal of one complementing the other.
bringing to us the revelation of Baha'u'llah. Well, friends, I think we should take a break here, and then I will probably remember some of the things that I have forgotten. We will see. Do you think we can start? You people must be exhausted, huh? Having been sitting here and listening. Well, where were we now? We were trying to understand something. Very little we can understand, remember, of the revelation of God. It's beyond us. We can get impressions of it, but not really to understand it fully. We were trying to understand something of the greatness of this revelation, and therefore appreciate the power of the words which are revealed to us in this day by Baha'u'llah. And we were talking about the revelation, how it came to him, how with such forcefulness, with such rapidity, the words were revealed in this age, that the world has been filled with the great ocean. It's like an ocean, really, of revelation. You know, Baha'u'llah has revealed, as I said, the words with such rapidity that within 1 hour 1,000 verses would have been revealed. To describe this for you and to show you the relationship of this revelation with the revelations of the past, we can look back and see the revelation of Islam, the revelation of the Quran. The Quran, which is the book of Islam, took 23 years to be revealed, and that is over 6,000 verses. Well, mankind needed only that. When the Bab appeared, his revelation was so much more profuse in pouring out his words that it took him 6 hours to reveal 1,000 verses. Now Baha'u'llah would reveal that in 1 hour. 6 times, almost 6 times faster than that of the Bab. It's very difficult to imagine what it is like to be placed in that time when revelation came to him. And when the revelation came to him, it was so powerful. The influence upon his own physical body was such that he says whenever revelation came to him, it was as if his body was put on fire. All the limbs of his body was put on fire. And this is why people could not fully look into his face at the time of revelation. They would be so overwhelmed if they did. There were so many people who tried to peep in the room where Baha'u'llah was revealing, and they could not stand it, and some of them fainted. Baha'u'llah would give permission to some of the followers, some of his disciples who begged to see the revelation, that he would allow them to come in. And they would come in and they would stand there for 1 or 2 minutes only. And then Baha'u'llah, with a movement of his hand, would dismiss them, which knew that they could not take it. And those people were so shaken during that experience. The experience was so much soul-stirring that in one of his tablets, Baha'u'llah says, if man was not weak, if God had not created man as a weak creature, we are weak creatures really, in one sense. If man was not weak, we would have allowed all people to come and witness the revelation of the Word of God. But they cannot stand it. You see? So, for 40 years, in this way, divine revelation had been pouring upon mankind. And as I said, it has
drown this world in an ocean of revelation. And yet we have only a portion of that revelation in writing. A portion of it. Because there were so many days and nights in the life of Baha'u'llah that he poured out from his lips the word of God, revealed so many things which were not recorded. When he was those years in the mountains of Kurdistan, all that was revealed was released into the air, into the open air, and that was all, for 2 years. And when Baha'u'llah came to Baghdad, Nabil mentions that for some years, every day and night, the equivalent of the Quran would have been revealed by Baha'u'llah within every 24 hours and not recorded. And even there came a time that Baha'u'llah ordered his secretary, at one stage in Baghdad, he was so disappointed from mankind and humanity and those people who were supposed to be his follower or followers of the Bab. He was so much distressed with their attitude and their condition that he asked his amanuensis, his secretary, to take a great portion of his writings, wash them and throw them into the river, saying mankind is not worthy of it in this age. So you see, it's a great, great ocean. And Abdul-Baha has added to this yet further of his explanations and elucidations, and he has enriched the Baha'i, the writings of Baha'u'llah. Baha'u'llah has left behind about 15,000 tablets. And some of these tablets may be 1 page, some of them may be 100 pages, 50 pages. Abdul-Baha has left behind something in the order of 26 or 27,000 tablets during the 29 years of his ministry. Again, the size of these tablets vary very much indeed. Shoghi Effendi, the guardian of the faith, has left behind also something in the order of 26 or 27,000 letters, some of which were so lengthy that they merited to be published in the form of books. Such things as the advent of divine justice, the promised days come. These were letters of Shoghi Effendi. They were not books. The National Assembly of the United States decided to publish them and to give it a name and to put subtitles for it, as you've noticed. All these letters of the world order of Baha'u'llah which are included in that, each one of them is a letter. The only book that Shoghi Effendi wrote was God Passes By, which is a history of the 100 years of the faith. So you see how much information we have, how much guidance we have. You see, the world is full of it, and how all these writings have to be compiled and edited and indexed so that we can have access to it. Those of you who were there last night, I was mentioning how when I was a child I used to hear from the Baha'is in Persia that how can we go and teach the faith all over the world with donkeys, because they had never seen any other form of transportation. They could not visualize anything else. And the answer was that God will create the means for it. God will create the means. And now we can see the means here. I mean, you travel with the speed of sound now, or double the speed of sound. So you see, when the faith needs it, it will be created for it. This communication which has come into being is in order that the message of Baha'u'llah may reach to all mankind. Without it, the faith of Baha'u'llah would have been really meaningless. To have a religion which is for the whole world and yet not being able to communicate. And as days goes on, and as the needs of the faith are more and more apparent, then God will create the means for it. I have mentioned this maybe to some of you. You may have heard me saying this. I believe firmly that every time that the faith goes through different stages of growth, and it's growing constantly. And as you need the means, it will be given to us. Some 30 years ago, when I was in Dublin, I wanted to make a telephone call to Tehran. And it took me 2 days to arrange it. Because you have to find out, you have to see who you're going to speak in Tehran with. You couldn't have a direct communication, a telephone. And that they would send a telegram to him, And he would come to the post office at a certain time, a certain hour, and we would go to the post office in our end at a certain time and a certain hour. And then by radio telephone, after 3 days of arrangement, we could speak together. Well, that was good enough. But today, the faith is moving with such force. The Baha'i world is becoming so active internationally. We have to be able to crisscross each other around the world. That you want to lift up your telephone at home and say to your friend, I'm coming, instead of today, I'm coming tomorrow. You have to be able to do it. And you see, the means are created for it. Always the means, as the faith grows, the means for its communications will grow with it. Otherwise we couldn't work. We could not have an international community if we did not have these simple facilities which we take it for granted. We couldn't. 30 years ago you could not have traveled from London to here. You may have traveled with great difficulties, probably, so many places and difficulties. 40 years ago certainly you couldn't. And there was no need for a person like me or somebody to come from England to here. There was no need for it. We did not have this universal relationship. There was a time that the faith was local in its functioning. When I was a young person, the faith has a local characteristic. Although we knew it was for the whole of mankind and the world, but our vision would not go beyond our local communities, because we were cut off from the rest of the world, from the rest of the country even. In our little village, for instance, if only a person would go once a year to the capital, it would be considered as one of the greatest acts he had done, to go to the capital. And when he came back, he would be considered as a very special man who had been to the capital. We did not have newsletters coming in every month like this. We did not have any of these things. The faith was really having a local characteristics. We used to teach in our town. We had the tablets of Baha'u'llah and Abdul-Baha and the writings of Shoghi Effendi. Whenever it came, it would reach us. Occasionally, every 6 months, maybe we would hear something from the Central Assembly in Tehran. So you see, the faith was local in character. Our visions was local. And then, it was like this until Shoghi Effendi really gave us the vision of national consciousness. And this happened in the 1940s. In America, it started in 1937 when the first 7-year plan came. And then in here they acquired a consciousness that you shouldn't be concerned with your own town, but that you should be concerned with the whole country. But in the rest of the world, it was in 1940s. The Shoghi Effendi gave plans to various countries. And in those days there were 7 or 8 national assemblies only. And to these 7 or 8 national assemblies in the 1940s, Shoghi Effendi gave them a plan to extend their teaching activities in other towns. And the idea occurred to us that we can and we should communicate with each other. And then the national communication was such that we could go from one town to another. We had then cars coming in, we could travel from place to place, from one town to another. And we acquired gradually, until 1953, we acquired the national consciousness. The faith rose up from a local level into a national level. In every country in the world, people began to act as one nation. You could see that. People pioneered from one end of the country to the other to form local spiritual assemblies. And so he rose up from that state of local into national. And it wasn't until Shoghi Effendi launched the 10-year crusade with which he brought the whole world together. And it didn't happen right away. It happened 10 years later. In 1963, when we had this Jubilee celebrations in London, in the Albert Hall in London, when we realized we became an international community, and we acquired a consciousness of international consciousness. Then it was the whole world. Baha'is began to travel from one end of the world to the other. We used to send pioneers from one country to another country, one end of the world to the other. But in the 1940s, it wasn't even conceivable that somebody could pioneer, say, from Persia to England. It was impossible to even think about it. You wouldn't think in such terms. If you wanted to pioneer, you would only go to a town in your own country. So you see how we raised from local into national into international community. And as we arose in these conditions, the world facilities, the physical facilities, rose with it. When we became an international community, we needed to communicate with each other on an international level, and gradually these facilities were created for us. You know, I was talking about the writings of Baha'u'llah. I was saying how vast it is. I was talking about the writings of Abdul-Baha. I was saying how vast they are. And the same thing with Shoghi Effendi's. But do you realize that during the lifetime of Shoghi Effendi, who was the guardian of the faith, none of these writings were indexed. None of them. None of them was in a form that you could try and say, I want on such and such a subject, what Baha'u'llah has said about this, that you could find it. All this great many writings, it was not indexed. And Shoghi Effendi did not need it to be indexed. He was divinely guided. You asked him a question, he would reply to you. He would say, this means this, and that means this, and you should do this, you should do that. But when the House of Justice came into being, in 1963, it was a different story. The House of Justice realized that they could not work, they could not give guidance unless they knew what Baha'u'llah had said on that subject, what Abdul-Baha had said about that subject, what Shoghi Effendi had said about that subject. But how were they going to find it? With all these writings of Baha'u'llah, which is an ocean, I described to you the immensity of the writings. How can they pass a resolution without looking at the writings? They couldn't. And so, the first thing they did was to have this research department established. And in this research department, the first thing they did, they began to index the writings of Shoghi Effendi. Or how they did it. I remember looking at the way they were working in those days, 1963. They would read a letter of Shoghi Effendi and they would see in one page there are 5 questions, 5 different subjects. Well, the ideal thing was to take 5 copies and put each one in a file. That's what you would do. Each one a different subject. Now, do you realize that perhaps you may be surprised to hear this, but something very simple nowadays we have, and it's called a photocopier. Well, that machine became available commercially just at the time that the House of Justice came into being. Before that, it didn't exist. And if we didn't have that simple, straightforward machine, how would you be able to copy 26,000 letters, each page 5 times? You know, put it in their files. Impossible. It came just in time. It didn't come at the time of Shoghi Effendi. He didn't need it. But as we needed it, it came into being. And I remember when they were making these indexes, someone told me this. He said, we have got now 500 subjects on a master index. They're card indexes. 500 subjects. How can you remember them? How can you know which is which? You will forget it tomorrow, what you have written on the first page. The mind could not conceive it, could not take it. And then came the computer. It took over. And now you go and ask them, you go and ask a question. I want to know what Shoghi Effendi has said about that subject, what Baha'u'llah has said about that subject. You just ask them, and this is what the House of Justice does. As soon as you ask a question from the House of Justice, they will ask their research department to see what Shoghi Effendi has said about it, if any. What Abdul-Baha has said about it, if any. And with the press of a button, you get the answers where to look for them. And it is copied, put in front of the members of the House of Justice. They know now what is involved. Do you see how, as the faith needs it, things will come for us? Now, how can you imagine the House of Justice could have worked in any other way? How could they give guidance in an ocean of writings without these facilities? But these facilities were not here at the time of Abdul-Baha. These facilities were not here at the time of Shoghi Effendi. They came into being just in time. And I can assure you that as time goes on, and as the speed of the growth of the faith increases, and when great numbers come into the faith, and we are going to be faced with complexities of administration, which we now cannot even imagine how we're going to handle it, facilities will be created for us. The world, all these things will be solved. God will create the means. I told you this yesterday. This is what I remember I heard this when I was 8 years of age, when the believers could not imagine they can travel throughout the world on donkeys, and they had never seen a bicycle even. They couldn't visualize any form of transportation, and they were asking, how can we go? And the answer was, this is the cause of God. It will create the means. We've gone away from our subject quite a long way back. We have to bring you back again. We were talking about reading the words of God in the morning and in the evening. Do you remember that? Or have you forgotten it? Yes. Well, if we read the words in that spirit that I mentioned, and knowing that the power is latent within these words, then it will influence our hearts. We must also know, going back to the Word of God again, that the Word of God is creative. Everything which is uttered by the manifestation of God, it operates, it becomes effective. Even whatever that word may be, I will give you an example of this. Over 100 years ago, when Baha'u'llah was living in a tiny little room in a house in Akka. Some of you have already been on pilgrimage. You have seen the little house of Udi Khammar, which is part of the house of Abud. Now, there is a little room in which they tell you that he revealed here the Kitab-i-Aqdas, the most holy book. There is nothing in this revelation greater than the revelation of the Kitab-i-Aqdas. This is one thing you can be sure of. There's nothing greater than this revelation of the Kitab-i-Aqdas. Of all the writings of Baha'u'llah, this one stands out. And in this book, Baha'u'llah wrote 4 or 5 lines. Can you imagine writing 4 or 5 downs in that small, depressing little room? And in that 4 or 5 lines, this is what he said. He said, in every locality, in every town, establish a house of justice in my name. And 9 people should become members of this, or something to this effect. I'm paraphrasing his words. And he did not write any more about it, or press us, or push us, or keep on reminding us about it. He just wrote those few lines, and he went. Now, look at what those few lines have done to the world in our communities. Look at what it has done. Tens of thousands of families have left their homes, have given up their jobs, have sacrificed everything they had, have gone to the most inhospitable parts of the world. Why did they do that? They went there in order to fulfill these words of Baha'u'llah, as pioneers to form local spiritual assemblies, which are the nucleus of those houses of justice which Baha'u'llah has ordered. You see the creativity of the word? And now we have about 30,000 of these institutions. 30,000 of them. And we are not going to stop here and say, well, this is a difficult job. And really it is. It's the most difficult job to form assemblies. You realize this. We are not going to say, well, look, this is too much. Let us drop it. We have enough. Let us do all the other teachings of Baha'u'llah, but not this one. We are not going to say that. On the contrary. We're going to continue and continue and continue until such time that every locality on the surface of this earth will have its house of justice. You see the creativity of the word now? Without forcing anybody? People give their lives for establishing local spiritual assemblies today. These are not words, it's the truth. People have given their lives for the establishment of these institutions. So much sacrifice have gone into it that if you study the history of the building up of these institutions, which have been brought about by pioneering movements all over the world, people of all colors and classes and races, not that they're all Europeans or Americans or Persians who do this, peoples of all colors and classes and backgrounds, speaking all kinds of languages, they have arisen with the same spirit to promote this principle. This very 4 lines in the Kitab-i-Aqdas, that's all they're doing. You see now the creativity of the word, how the word of God is created, penetrates into the hearts. Now this is, so when we recite the words in the morning and in the evening, we must remember these things. We must remember it's the word of our Creator. We must remember the way it was revealed. We must remember that these words are creative. We must remember that these words penetrate into the hearts. It has infinite significances and meanings and powers within it. And then, of course, it will affect us. And also, above all, we must look at that great ocean. Never leave it out of our sight. You remember the story of the drop and the ocean? We must always look at the greatness of that ocean of revelation, and then we become humble. And then these words will penetrate into our hearts. And so when we read the words, when I read the words, when you read the words in the morning, recite them, and then you go to your work, we will remember it. We must remember it. And when you are dealing with business, in your business, whatever it is, from time to time, let the thought of Baha'u'llah come to your mind. Let it flash into your mind, Baha'u'llah, his words that you have read this morning. Just flash it. It comes as a flash in your mind. And it becomes like a sharp electric impulse in our bodies. And even the man who is looking at you is not a Baha'i. He could notice a difference in you. There is something happens. You just are a different person. You've just been in communing with him in that instant, without interfering with your work. And so you see, in this way, the food is being digested now. What you have read, they'll penetrate into our hearts. And then you become hungry when you get home to read more of the words of God. When we started this sort of discussions and talks in some European countries, especially in Ireland, that I live there, and the Irish people are very, very spiritual people. Very spiritual people. They took it to heart. And one of them asked a question, a very genuine question. He said, look, in the mornings, I have in such a rush to go to my work. I can't read the writings. And of course you realize this. The Baha'u'llah says you must read it in the morning and in the evening. If I don't read it in the morning, and then the evening comes, I have, as if I've gone out without my breakfast, spiritual breakfast. And I'm afraid Baha'u'llah had not said that it doesn't matter if you didn't read it in the morning, it doesn't matter, lump them together and read it one go. It says in the morning and in the evening. I'm sorry. And there is a reason for it, is, as I mentioned today, it's that these words may penetrate into our hearts. Just like food that you eat, you have the food in the morning, you have to take the food in the evening. So, it's very important. When I go to my office and I'm very busy and I have not read the words in the morning, and then the morning comes and goes, and then when I go home, I've missed reading the writings. And they said, what are we going to do? Because some people said, we can't do it in the mornings. We can't get up earlier. There we are. And we are tired in the mornings. You know, some people stay very late nights for some reason. And then in the mornings they can't get up. I've seen many of them like that. Especially in summer schools it's like this. Always the classes in the morning is absolutely empty. And people, to such an extent that I know in some countries they have come to the conclusion that classes in the morning shouldn't start until 11:30. They just can't help it. No matter what they do, people are staying till 3 in the morning, 4 in the mornings, having all kinds of fun and talks and late night sessions. And somehow people like late night sessions, as we call them, you know, which is informal, sitting together and talking, than the official lectures. So, now, what are we going to do, he said. He said, I'm tired in the mornings. No time. Well, the idea came, why not take a book with you to your office? You can't let this day pass without reading the words. So take a book with you, one of the writings of Baha'u'llah. And so it became customary for some people to take the hidden words with them. And then they find 10 minutes to sit down at some place and read it. You see, this is important to be serious about it. And to be regular. It's no use to read it this week and then next week saying, oh yes, we must read every day. I read last week one passage, I read one passage this week. You know, it's just saying I've eaten my food last month and I'm going to have another feed today. You know, Baha'u'llah has said every morning and every evening. And he said, if you don't read it, you are not faithful to the covenant of God. I tell you a story. 2 months ago, we were in Paris, and we were staying with some friends. my wife and family, and we were all staying with some friends. We had an Irish young lady who we knew, she was in Paris also. And we invited her to come and stay that night with us so that we could see her. Oh, she said, I would love to come. But she said, I'm in town now. I can't go home. I have no pajamas to bring with me. I have no toothbrush. Oh, these people said, we'll give it to you. Doesn't matter. Come on in. She said to me, there is another problem. Now, all of this happening to visiting. I said, what's the problem? She said, these people we are staying with, they have no English books. No. She said, I must read the writings tonight and tomorrow morning. I have no books with me. Have you got an English book that you can give it to me of the writings of Baha'u'llah for tonight and tomorrow morning? So that she could come and stay. You see now how serious it is? This is how they have taken it to their hearts. And now the faith is growing there with beautiful qualities of people coming into the faith. Now, all of this is really because we are turning to Baha'u'llah, obeying him, his teachings, obedience. If he is the voice of God, then he must be obeyed. Obedience. So now, so much about reciting the words in the morning and in the evening. And you know why we said all this about reciting the words in the morning and in the evening, how this came about, you remember? We were talking about the soul. We talked about the spirit of faith being born. This morning we talked about how the spirit of faith is born. How our soul becomes pregnant, becomes fertilized by the influences of the revelation of Baha'u'llah, and how it will give birth to the spirit of faith. And then we said, now that you have given birth to, like a mother who has given birth to a child, you have to feed it. That's why we talked so much about reading the writings of Baha'u'llah. And I want to remind you again, there's a great difference between the writings, like tablets of Baha'u'llah, and his prayers. Prayers are different things, and writings are different things. And we said this morning how opposite of each other they are. You remember that. Now I want to go a little further. It's not only that we should read the writings and then everything will be fine. You have to do other things. Just as I said this morning, in order to live, you have to do a lot of things together. You have to eat, you have to sleep, you have to cook, you have to shop, you have to wear clothes, you have to do a lot of things to live. And it's the same thing in the faith. You have to do a lot of things together. The other subject that I want to bring up now, that is a subject which may be foreign to many of us. And I'll mention it frankly, it may be foreign to so many of us who come from the Christian background. Reading the writings is not foreign. Saying prayers is not foreign. But one of the laws of Baha'u'llah is the saying of obligatory prayers. Now, I want to tell you a little bit about this obligatory prayer so that you can see what it is. It is not just a prayer. This is something you must remember. It's not just a prayer. You cannot put it on the same level as ordinary prayers that we have. In the original language, there is a special word for it, which is different from prayer. But because there is no word in English to translate it into, it has been translated in this form of calling it obligatory prayer, to indicate it's an obligation to perform that rite. It's a Baha'i rite. It's the ritual. You see, the faith is not without rituals. We have some rituals. But the only thing is this: these rituals are not man-made. These rites are given to us by Baha'u'llah. The saying of obligatory prayers is a religious rite. And it is a law of Baha'u'llah. And if there is a choice of saying the obligatory prayers, if you have a choice to say the obligatory prayer today or read the writings, the obligatory prayers have precedence. And it's very beautiful. You see, God has not forbidden, has not withheld from us all the pleasures of the world. You must not think that Baha'u'llah has come to stop us having pleasure. All the pleasures of this world, you can enjoy it, and it is for you, but you have to do it in the right way. Baha'u'llah mentions the idea of detachment is not to become a poor man and a mendicant or live an ascetic life. You can, he said, have all the good things of this world. He said, in fact, all the good things of this world, in one of his tablets he mentions, all the good things of this world is created for the loved ones of God. It's all created for you. But he says, do not become attached to them. Do not make them to rule you, to rule over you. But you can have them. He says, if you can eat in vessels of gold, eat vessels of gold. But don't become attached to them. Don't let them become your master. So you see, the idea of detachment is so different from what people think. When you say detach yourself from the things of this world, some people think now this means you have to become careless, you have to give up the world. And this is against the teachings of Baha'u'llah. He has never told us to desert the world. He says, in fact, he says, engage yourself in all the work and the professions. And he says, your work is service. Your work is worship of God when you are working. So you see that how much the view of detachment is different from what we understand it. Now that I'm talking about detachment, let me go a little bit further about this, because this is a subject which we often talk about. We often talk about this. In the writings you hear more and all the time telling us that you have to be detached from the things of this world. To be detached does not mean, as I said, to become careless, to give up the world and become poor. In fact, sometimes poor people are much more attached to the world than rich people. You know, sometimes poor people are much more attached to the rich than the rich people. There is a story in Persian of a king and a dervish. Maybe you have heard that story. It's a Persian story. And the king and the dervish. The dervishes are supposed to be, now they're supposed to be renounced. They have renounced the world and they are detached, and in fact they have nothing. And they have really, that's one thing, they have nothing. And they go around and they have got a little basket. And they carry this basket around with them, so that as they go around, people would just put a little bit of food in these baskets for them. And they sleep anywhere that they come across. You see how much this is against the teachings of the faith? Although they think this is detachment. This is very much against the teachings of the faith to do this. Anyhow, it was supposed to be, this man was supposed to be so detached from the things of this world that the king became very fond of this idea. And he invited this dervish to his palace. And then they stayed together for some time there, and he taught them a lot of lessons about detachment. And the king became very, very much of a convert to this idea. And he said, well, I'll become like you. And so the king disguised himself in the garb of a dervish, left the palace, and they both of them left the palace and went on wandering. You know, just this is what they do. They wander around. And after a mile that they'd gone, suddenly the dervish, in horror, he found out that he has left behind his basket in the palace of the king. And he said, oh, this is terrible. We have to go back and get our basket. I can't go without it. The king said to him, look, I have left behind my palaces, and you were attached to your little miserable basket, you see. Which is true. Now you see, really, detachment has nothing to do with riches or with poverty. Although Baha'u'llah says, and so in other religions, that if you are a very rich man, it's difficult to be detached. But if you become detached when you are in a position of wealth and other things, then your station is very... And I think I was mentioning it some time ago to the friends here. One evening we were together, and I mentioned the meaning of detachment as far as I understand it. I'll repeat it for you here. You know, every person, all of us, by nature, we are very possessive people. By nature, man is possessive. We want to possess things. We want to own things. We want to own our own things. And as you go around, you go and always add things to your collections. We are collectors. You have a house, you have a business, you have money, you want to add to it. You go out, you find something beautiful, a beautiful painting, you add to it. This is your collections. You bring it home. And we gather these things all around us. This is true, really and truly. I suppose if somebody looks down upon us from the spiritual worlds of God, who have passed from this state of attachment, they will be amazed how we are gathered things around us, you know. It's like these little creatures who store their food, you know, and they are protecting it with their lives. We are really very queer people. This is the way man is. This is the way God has created us. What can you do? This is the animal in us. We are possessive. And we are the master in this. You know, the master always stands in the middle, and all our things revolve around us. We are the most important thing. And everything revolves around it. Everything beautiful you buy, you add to your collections. Until one day, you come across the faith. And you say, this is a very beautiful thing. This is the most beautiful thing I've got. And then you add it to your collections. Yes, you are in the middle, and all the things revolve around you, your house, your business, your family, your possessions, and your faith. You see? You have an hour for your hobbies, you have an hour for your family, you have so many hours for your work, and you have an hour for the faith. Well, such a man is attached to the things of this world. He is not detached. You see? He's not detached. He is attached. Because he pays the same attention to his house, or much more maybe, than to his faith. But if you put the faith in the middle of your life as a pivot, as an axis of our life, and then we and our possessions revolve around it, then you are detached. You still can keep your possessions. But the faith is first in your life. This is really a practical way of knowing what is attachment and what is detachment. And so that when the challenge comes to us, and always challenges come to the Baha'is, to arise and serve the faith. When the challenge comes to us, then we know what to give, how much of our possessions to give, how much of our time to give. And you will give all your time if necessary, because the faith is first in your life. And if I want to move my home and go to some other town, I'll find out whether the faith is going to benefit from it, or whether the faith is going to be harmed by it. And then I'll do according to what the faith needs. This is really a criterion for finding out whether one is attached or one is not attached to the things of this world. And I will mention one form of attachment which is the most formidable and the most harmful and the most difficult maybe. It is not attachment to things. It is attachment to our own self. The ego. Attachment to our own self. This is the most dangerous form, and it will take probably a lifetime to get rid of it. A lifetime. It needs spiritual battles that we have to fight always within us to subdue the self. The self is the greatest enemy we have. And I don't want you to mix up the self of man with the soul.
The self is what is the animal self. Is the force within us which drives us towards animal nature. That is the self. And we have to always be in a position to have a rein on that dangerous animal. And whenever it raises its head, just put it back in its place. This is where we have to be always in control. I will give you an example of what I mean by this, our own self. I'll give you an example of this. And I will give you an example of one of those, the local spiritual assemblies are places where we are all tested when we go into it. And when we sit there, we will be tested. That's a marvelous testing arena for Baha'is. We are tested all the time, perhaps, and we are not aware of it. Now, I'll give you an example of what self means. An attachment to self means we become attached to our opinions. I love my opinion. It's my views. It is my views. It's very important, And I give my views. And if it is not accepted, I'll be upset. And if it is accepted, I'll be delighted. And I will go around and say, this was my idea, I was mentioning yesterday, the word I and my is really a very ugly thing in the faith, in life. This is my idea. But really, a person who is selfless is a person who gives his ideas and he forgets about it. Really forgets about it now. Not to just say outwardly forget about it, but really. And so that if your idea was put forward, and if they said, what a marvelous idea it is, we are going to write to the House of Justice and say this person's ideas have been so marvelous that I don't feel, oh great, now I'm elated and I'm exalted, this is my idea. Now as soon as you think in your heart, that way, be sure we are attached to our own self. This is the attachment to our own self. One example of it. Or if they came back and said, this was a terrible idea, this man's ideas is horrible. Every time he comes, he gives us terrible ideas. Okay. One should not be affected by it. You just have given your ideas, you forget about it. Because in this faith, now nobody is telling us that we should suppress our views. I'm not saying that. In a local assembly, we have to give our views frankly, and if you found that your friends did not understand you, you have to give them another explanation of it and explain to them. But once you give it in, once you give your ideas, it's no longer yours. You have to forget it. This is selflessness. Now, this was just an example of what self is. This I is the self. And in this faith, Baha'u'llah in this day and age has removed from us, from our midst, anything which would compel people or make people to become, to have a position so that they will become, they will go around and throw their weight around, as they say. There is no such a thing in the faith. This is one of the great bounties of God, that Baha'u'llah has completely eradicated the idea of personalities. The great station that we have, as I said yesterday, really is that of servitude. A real servant is very great and beautiful. A real servant is the most beautiful thing, the most exalted thing we can do. And a real servant will never want him to be exalted. As soon as you get him exalted, it's not nice. And I think that we have to learn these things as time goes on from the writings. I mentioned that yesterday. I'm not going to repeat it. And here we come to another one of those teachings of Baha'u'llah, which not until we carry it out can we do anything proper, and that is to love one another. To love one another. Now you see, you cannot force yourself to love somebody, can you? And it's no good to do that either. It's a worse thing. It's a bad thing to do. It's better not to do it if it is artificial. I know, we all understand this. Love must come from the heart. But it is easy to love people you like. It's not easy to love people you don't like. And we must also be practical. In all these communities, there are people who do something to you which you don't respond positively to. You feel irritated sometimes, maybe. I don't know. And that is why we come to dislike people. I'm talking to you frankly. Now, how can we love that person that you dislike or you don't like so much? And not until we are able to love him can we do anything in this life, in this faith. Nothing. You read the writings all day, you say your prayers every day, you carry out all the teachings of Baha'u'llah, but if you don't love the friends with all your heart, you don't love each other, then things will not go forward. We become frustrated, we become unhappy, even though I read the writings every day. Now, I must make a note of some of these things that comes to my mind. Now, I will tell you an incident which happened to me some years ago, and that might explain what I'm trying to say. Some years ago, I was walking in a very crowded street in London. Very crowded. Thousands of people pass you every minute. And these people don't mean much to you because you don't even take notice of them, as if they are not there. And then suddenly, I noticed across the road, on the other side of the street, there was a man who used to come to our firesides years before. He was not a Baha'i, but he used to come to our firesides. And as soon as I saw that man, my heart jumped for him. And I said to myself, look at this crowd. None of them probably know about Baha'u'llah, but that man has heard the name of Baha'u'llah, and this is marvelous. It's the distinction. I could see the distinction. He has heard the name of Baha'u'llah many a times. He is distinguished in my sight from the rest of them who haven't heard it. To hear the name of Baha'u'llah is a great privilege, a great distinction. You see now? Now how much more is the position of a person who says, I am a Baha'i? Can you see the station of this person? Forget about his doings. Forget about all the things he does which run against your grain and upset you. But look at what he has. He is a Baha'i. Now when I say he is a Baha'i, what does it mean really? I can only talk about myself. Do you know really and truly, and I mean this, I cannot say I am a Baha'i except I'm related to him by name. It's just a name. It's just that I'm attached myself to his name. I cannot say I am a Baha'i, truly. Impossible to say that. But by name, I am attached to him. And that is a distinction. Who cares what I do and what my life is? Who is not perfect? Who is perfect? We all have our shortcomings. But this person has a trace of Baha'u'llah in him. Just a name. And that is a great distinction. You compare him with the rest of mankind, he stands far above it. Now look into his face in that way. Don't look at his problems and shortcomings that you might see, because you look into his face and see a trace of Baha'u'llah, and then you love him I can assure you, you will love him because of Baha'u'llah, because of his attachment by name to him. And then you can embrace him without even knowing what his name is. Then you will never see the wrong things. And as soon as something happened that you disliked, you remember that. We are all full of shortcomings. This is a very important principle, really. And this is the meaning of humility. This is the meaning of servitude. Meaning of servitude is not to come in and bow before each other. But the meaning of servitude is to look into each other's faces and see a trace of Baha'u'llah. And then you love that person. And you become united with him. And then we have a sin-covering eye. I don't want to see the bad things. No, you don't want to see the bad things in me. Don't see it that way. And if of course somebody does something which harms the faith through his actions, which brings disgrace upon the faith, then it is our function to inform the institutions of the faith and say, look here, this person is doing something which is very bad. And then it is for the institutions of the faith to help him to overcome his problems. And if he didn't, well, they might even say to him, you can't remain in the faith. Okay, that is not for me to do that. But as an individual, we have to have a sin-covering eye and to see in every face a trace of Baha'u'llah. There definitely is. And that is what makes every person so beautiful, really. It's that which makes every person so beautiful and so distinguished. You read the writings and see what the station he has destined for a true believer. Someone who is attached by name in the sight of God. You remember what Christ said? He said, when the man came to him, his disciples, and said to him, my father is dead, can I go and bury him? He said, leave the dead to bury their dead. Means all the people in his sight who had not faith were dead. Now this is not in any way to indicate that we have to look down upon people, far from it. And go out and say, oh, you're dead, you're no good. No, far from it. When you become a Baha'i, you realize all your shortcomings. I will recognize my own shortcomings. As soon as you become a Baha'i, you can find out you're full of shortcomings. All the shortcomings come to light. Those of you who were here, I was talking about it yesterday, saying that when the lamp lights up, when the light is there, you see, when I look into this light, can I see anything bad in him? No. You can see all the light. But I'm sure if you go very close to it, if you switch it off, they're full of dust. But you won't see the dust. This is how we should look into the faces of the friends. See a little bit of Baha'u'llah, and that will overlook. You can then overlook. You won't see anything else. Really, you won't see anything else. Everybody has good qualities, marvelous qualities. And one of the things that we have to learn to do is to encourage each other. Is to encourage, the local assemblies should encourage the friends. The friends should encourage their friends. Encouragement is very important for our institutions, to encourage the believers. And encouragement must be genuine. Really, if you ever come across a friend, a Baha'i who is disenchanted or who is not coming to the meetings or has got some problem, be sure that what has happened is that no one has encouraged him. He needs encouragement. I'll give you an example, a story of this. And this is a very beautiful story I heard from one of our auxiliary board members in Britain. This woman is a teacher. And she teaches difficult children. All the rebellious type children are brought to her class. You know, children who nobody can manage them. When they come in, they really disturb everything. And she is in charge of this. In big schools, there is a problem. Often you come across children who no teacher can handle. Well, she tells us how she works with them. She said, I must find something good in them and then encourage them. That's the only way, he said, I can harness them. This is a very, very wise thing. This is how the faith has grown also. This is how Shoghi Effendi always, and Baha'u'llah and Abdul-Baha encouraged something. They saw something in you which was good. And what a wonderful person, what wonderful things you have done without meaning it. You have to find something in that person. And she said one day, this woman told us, she said one day, a little boy was brought into my class who was the most difficult child. And he was disturbing so much that the whole class was disturbed, the whole day. And she said, I looked at him, I tried to find out what good quality I can find in him, and I couldn't. There was no good quality that she could find to praise him, or to help him, to encourage him. I remember I said to him, well, couldn't you do something? Well, send him out of this school, out of the room for a while, if he's disturbing everybody. Oh, she said, if I do that, my relationship is ruined. It's no use. I cannot do that. I must find something. And she said, when we were sitting after a while, I noticed that, all the children in school, most of them, when they sit, they stoop over their desk, they just sit down like this. They stoop and they are bending more or less. But she said, I saw that this fellow Billy is sitting straight. Now that was good enough to start him. So she said, she announced to the whole class, she said, I want all of you to look at Billy. You see how marvelous he is, how straight he sits? Now I want you all to sit like Billy. Now Billy had never heard anybody praising him. And now his eyes opened and he began to look around. He saw he became the center of attraction. Everybody looked at him. Everybody sat straight. Now, Billy becomes excited. He sits there. And he is no longer going to be difficulty. And all the children, every session when they come in, the teacher reminds them, now don't forget, you all have to sit like Billy. And what Billy does, he is so excited about it, because everything he has been doing, everybody has been attacking him more or less, of all the wrong things he's doing. Now he's going to do something else which is going to be good, so that the teacher might encourage him again. You see, this is a marvelous lesson. This is what our institutions really are doing, and will be doing, and should be doing really. And ourselves. And I think that encouragement, I'm sure some of the believers who are discouraged and who are left alone, if you find them, anybody like that, if you find what good qualities they have and try to encourage that good quality and say to them that you can serve the faith in that way through this particular ability that you have that nobody else has, we will become excited and they'll come close to us. Now, as I mentioned, this question of loving each other and not trying to judge one another is very important. Because Shoghi Effendi, in one of his writings, he mentions this. He mentions that the function of the individual in relation to another individual is to love each other and to be compassionate and to be loving, but not to judge. Whereas he says the function of the institutions of the faith, the function of the local assemblies and the national assembly, is to apply justice. And when you apply justice, you cannot become compassionate. And Shoghi Effendi says at the present time it's the reverse. The individual Baha'is, when they come together, they judge each other and they act towards each other as if one is a local assembly judging the other person and criticizing. And the local assemblies, when it comes to give, or the national assemblies, when they come to apply justice, they become compassionate. Every Baha'i has marvelous qualities, and we have to look into their faces and see those qualities of Baha'u'llah. I'll tell you another story, just to give you this. You know that sometimes there are difficulties in Baha'i communities. And there was a community in Europe, a Baha'i community, which had great personal problems, personality problems. You can never solve personality problems by expedient measures. You cannot solve them by expedient measures. And the only way you can really do it is to shower everyone with love. And anyhow, in my function, I was asked to go and see if I can help them. Well, there was a big file, which if I show you the size of it, it was as big as this, about this community, of all the problems they had with each other. Some of them even wouldn't talk to each other. If they saw each other in the streets, they would avoid each other. It was a terrible situation. And they said that it was obvious from reading these files. I decided not to read them, and at the end I decided it's no good to read them. But I knew there was one man who they said he was the culprit. He was the responsible man. He really was the man who has created all this terrible entanglement and problems for years. And people had gone there, national assemblies, members, all kinds of people, board members, gone there to try to solve it, and it became always worse, to such an extent that these people had a great prejudices against the institutions of the faith. It became very difficult. Well, I went along and I met with these people, not that man who was all the cause of the difficulties, but I met with all the others, and I found that they were beautiful Baha'is. Really and truly. They were just beautiful Baha'is. You couldn't see anything bad in them. Oh, marvelous. And we talked about it individually with everybody. And then I was afraid to go and see that man. I had to go and see him anyhow. That was the problem. And I reached almost to the door of this house. Before I ring the bell, it suddenly occurred to me very clearly that I am going there with the wrong feelings. You know, because I've read some of these files, it's no good. And I knew that this man must have marvelous qualities. Now, this story of disagreement, the story of this community is such that for years and years and years this has been going on. And it could not be resolved. And this man was obviously the source of all the problem. I have no doubt about it. This was in this file, you could see that. But I decided immediately, before I rang the bell, to really purify my motives. I couldn't go like this. That he has some good qualities. Of course he has. He must have. He's a Baha'i. After all, he is a Baha'i. That's great. That's good enough. So with that feeling, I rang the bell. Now, I can tell you that he and his wife were sitting there waiting for 2 or 3 days, trembling with fear of they're going to see the angel of death, or is that what you call it? When he comes. They were frightened of what's going to happen now, you know. Well, when I looked at this face of this woman, I just looked at it just as I'm looking at your faces, and this woman almost melted. And she went running to her husband. I could hear whispering, saying to her that he's not that bad, you know. He's not that bad at all, but we were thinking about it. Anyhow, this man came and we sat down and we embraced each other and we sat down. And I thought, what a wonderful thing it is to meet another Baha'i, you know. And we talked about our experiences in the faith, of his services, what he has been. And we talked and talked about all the stories. We became so heated up with excitement. And he went in and he showed me all the years and years of service this man had. Of all the photographs of the friends in the old countries, in other countries that he has been, in other things he'd done. A very learned person he was. And we talked about the faith. We went into all the some of the abstruse writings of Baha'u'llah, and he said something and I said something, and 3 hours we were discussing these things. We became so much enthused. And then at the end of it, I thought, now I better say nothing about his problems. And I said, well, now I better go. I decided I'll leave it for some other time. I'll come back again tomorrow. And I was going to go. And you know what he did? He grabbed me. He said, all of this problem in this town is my fault. He said, everything is my fault. I hadn't said a word. He said, I want you to do something. He said, I want you to accompany me to go to the houses of the believers. Now, these are the people he wouldn't talk to. He wouldn't see them. He wouldn't ever. And he said, I want to prostrate myself at their feet and beg forgiveness. I hadn't said anything to him. We never entered the subject. And you know, we did that. He came along, we went up, we knocked on the doors, and people were startled to see him coming to the door of his house. And he literally, he prostrated himself. He cried and cried and cried. And the others cried and cried and cried. And then we went to somebody else's house, and the same thing happened. And in the evening we gathered all the friends together after 2 or 3 years. And it was a crying meeting all the time. They were crying. And ever since, they felt so united, so happy. And then the faith grew in that town. Local people became Baha'is. Now you see, and we never said a word about what this man had done. We have to really, genuinely, in our approach to people, is to see a trace of Baha'u'llah in every soul, in every face. All problems will vanish, I can assure you. This is how the faith works. This is the power that He has released for us. God, He has released this tremendous power. And this power is not for me or for you or for him. This power is for everybody. There is no exclusiveness here. Every one of us can draw from this power. Every one of us can attract Him to ourselves. Well, we were talking about something different. You remember we were saying that to read the writings and to say our obligatory prayers is not sufficient unless we carry out the teachings of Baha'u'llah, obey his laws. And then to love one another. It's one of the most important teachings. And if we love one another, everything else will work out. And don't force yourself to love, but try to love. Try to see if there is any problem somewhere, to approach it in this way, that we are all we all have to go from this life. You know this. We're not going to be here always. Every one of us will have to go. And this is not a place to enter into. These years that we are living here is not a place that we should try to judge each other and say, oh, this person is so irritating to me, or that person is so difficult. Now, here is where we have to turn to the writings and see what are the teachings of Baha'u'llah and do it for his love. He says, carry out my commandments. I'm paraphrasing the words of Baha'u'llah. Carry out my commandments for the love of my beauty. We do not carry out the teachings of Baha'u'llah because it's good for us. This is a very important point to remember. We don't carry out the teachings because, if I carry out the teachings of Baha'u'llah, I am going to be wise, I'm going to be a good man, I'm going to be a very knowledgeable man. This is not the real motive again. Although at first when you become a Baha'i, naturally you see the teachings and you say it's marvelous to become adorned with all these characteristics and beautiful things that the faith has. But when you become a deeper Baha'i, you realize that you do obey the teachings of Baha'u'llah for the love of Baha'u'llah. This is a marvelous motive, because you love him. Again, remember, When you love somebody, go back to nature, go back to life. When you love somebody, and you really love somebody, and I'm talking of real love, 100% love, when you really love somebody, you will not question what your beloved wants. You just do it because you love that person. You see? This is the real motive, the real relationship. Although, when you carry out the teachings of Baha'u'llah for the love of him, yes, all those things will be yours. You will become knowledgeable, you will become wise, you will become deep, you will acquire all those qualities, but you acquire it not because you wanted it at first, for yourself, for the satisfaction of yourself, but you've done it because you love him. Just as much as you, when your beloved asks you something in your life, whom you love very much, when he asks for something or she asks for something, you do it because of him or because of her. This is a good motive. This is the real love. Today, Shoghi Effendi has told us, Baha'u'llah has told us, Abdul-Baha has told us that not until we live the life in accordance with the teachings can our work of teaching become successful. This is another thing which is very important to bear in mind. Some of you have remembered that celebrated passage from Shoghi Effendi, which I haven't got it with me to read it for you, but I'm sure many of you who are familiar with it, this is a celebrated passage when he says, not by the force of numbers. Not by the force of numbers, not by a mere disposition of teachings, and not by an organized campaign of teaching can you influence the people who are not Baha'is and bring them into the faith. I'm paraphrasing his ideas. He says one thing and one thing alone. One thing and one thing alone. See how much emphasis he puts on it? And there is no other alternative. One thing and one thing alone, he says, which will bring people to the faith, is that each one of us act as mirrors. Mirrors. And we are always acting as mirrors, you know that. Every human being is a mirror of what is inside him. But he says we should act as mirrors which will project and reflect the teachings of Baha'u'llah in its purity, in its pure form. He says then it'll influence others. And there are many stories, I'm sure you have heard many stories of such beautiful Baha'is who had lived this life in this way. And as they walk in the streets, they have been the center to which people turn to. Remember, Martha Ruth was one such person. I mean, wherever she went, people were attracted to her. I mean, this is part of our history. And this is not something that she was a very special human being. She was a human being. But she had an absolute connection with Baha'u'llah. She was connected fully to him. And this is what happened. And therefore she became a perfect mirror. What was in her heart reflected out in her face. And people saw that radiance and they were attracted to her. This is the way. And this is what Shoghi Effendi tells us. And this is why I said that the forces are all over the world preparing us. We can bring great numbers into the faith if we do these things. And I'm sure that your community has been really in the forefront of teaching activities. We have to learn from you. Forgive me for saying these things. Your community has been so successful in teaching. At one stage, I remember they would say that 1% of the people of this country are Baha'is. And whenever we talk about Alaska, it rings such a marvelous community. And now I can say it is. It really is. It's a very beautiful community. You cannot see yourselves because you're sitting there. But I can see this. It's marvelous. And this is not because of us. This is because of Baha'u'llah. He has given us all these marvelous powers. Now, time is coming, Mr. Chairman, to have a little break. When is your break? Now? I want to tell you now, having said all of this so far, we have talked about growing our faith. Our faith grows. We want our faith to grow. And we talked about it yesterday in great detail of the things we have to do. Not that I have said this, but what Baha'u'llah has said.
reading the writings and saying the obligatory prayers, and now we said about living the life. Living the life. But there is one thing, that if we don't do it, really and really, this is real serious. If we don't do it, all these things will not be of any use. Even living the life would not bring up the results. And I will explain to you what it is next session. So, will take you to nature, and you see that in life, if there is a man or a person who, say, eats a lot of food regularly, but he does not move. Can you imagine a person like that? Never moves. He's sleeping all the time, eating and sleeping, or staying up. What will happen to this person? This is not going to be a healthy life. He's not going to be able to live. And even if he lives, he'll be a sick man. The right way of living is to eat your food and then exercise your muscles and move around and work hard. And the harder you work, the more you are healthier. The healthier you are, you see. Now this is a basic principle of life, and exactly the same principle applies in the faith. There may be people who say, well, I will read the writings, when in fact he may be a scholar. He may become a scholar of the faith. He reads everything. And he may be talking an awful lot as well. But he doesn't serve the faith. Doesn't do anything. That person is going to be unhealthy, going to be frustrating. The real way of life is to read the writings, to say your prayers, obligatory prayers, to live the life, to do all these things we have to do, but just as important, serve the cause of God. And the greatest service today to the cause of God is teaching. So you see now how there is a balance here, the balance comes into it. We are not going to be the people who are going to read and become carried away into the worlds of God or something like that. But we are going to do these things together. We're going to do this so that we can serve the faith. Although there are many things we can do to serve the faith, but I mentioned the greatest of all things in service to the faith is teaching. And I'll explain this to you later on, why this is that the greatest of all things is teaching. Now, serving the cause has been described to us from age to age, from time to time, by Baha'u'llah, by Abdul-Baha, by Shoghi Effendi, and today by the House of Justice. Because every period of the faith, the time of the Bab, for instance, it was a period of itself. The greatest of the work of the Babis then was to teach the faith. That stood in forefront of all other activities. But there were other things they had to do, as well as teaching, which was specific to that particular age. For instance, if you were a Babi at the time of the Bab, you had to teach the faith, but you also had to learn how to ride a horse, really, and to hold your sword, for instance. This was how it was done. It was a special requirement of that age. Then when Baha'u'llah came, again teaching was in the forefront of all the activities. But then Baha'u'llah said, now is the time never to use your sword, but to give your life. And that was a period of great stories of great heroism and martyrdoms during that period of Baha'u'llah, and steadfastness. And then Abdul-Baha's period, you could say, again teaching was in the forefront. But he said, now is the time to remain steadfast in the covenant. There was a time that Abdul-Baha
so much, the cause was attacked, at that time, during the ministry of Abdul-Baha, by the enemies from within. These are the covenant breakers. They attacked the faith with such fierceness that if it wasn't for the fact that, as I was mentioning yesterday, the cause of God, the machinery, the covenant was so strong, and with the help of some heroes of the faith, a few who rallied around Abdul-Baha like lions and protected the faith, today the faith would have been broken up. But it was because the machinery of the covenant was so strong they couldn't do it. But during the period of Abdul-Baha, the emphasis was on the steadfastness in the covenant. Abdul-Baha used to send teachers all over the world to help the friends to remain steadfast in the covenant. We may not have the time to deal with this subject of the covenant. Of course, we can't deal with everything. But now, that was a special period again. But again, teaching stood in forefront. Now, since then Shoghi Effendi's ministry and today, the beginning of the formative age, again teaching the cause is in the forefront. But the specific task of today is the building of the institutions of the faith. Now, you cannot live in this age and do the things which belong to the other ages. You can't say, well, I'm a Baha'i, but I'm going to now learn how to ride a horse and hold a sword in my hand, as the early believers used to do. This would be out of place. But you cannot also, if you are going to be devotedly follow the teachings, we cannot stay away from building the institutions of the faith. This is our task. But teaching and building the institutions of the faith are the two major tasks that the Baha'is of this particular period are faced with. Now, I want to talk a little bit about teaching, which is really, Baha'u'llah says, the most meritorious of all things in the sight of God. It is not just one of the most meritorious. He says it's the most meritorious of all things in the sight of God. Now, why is it? And first of all, I want to mention that there is a great, in my view, there is a great misunderstanding in the Baha'i communities about the purpose of teaching. Often people think that we teach the faith so that we may increase our numbers. This is not the main purpose of teaching. This is not the primary purpose of teaching, although other religions do that probably for this reason. But we must not be under this impression that the main purpose of teaching, I'm saying the main purpose of teaching, is not to increase our numbers. This is a secondary purpose. This will come as a result. The result of teaching is that our numbers will increase. But there is a far, far greater reason for teaching the faith. Teaching is an act of devotion to God. It's an act of devotion. Now, I will explain this to you in this way. Again, we go to nature and look at nature to see what teaching is in nature. In nature, you will find always any object which depends upon upon its life giver. Any object which depends upon its life giver. You know, there is a life giver. For instance, this earth is a life giver. This earth is the mother earth, isn't it? It is this earth which has created everything. Everything which you see on this earth has come about from this earth. So it's like the mother earth. We all are dependent upon this earth for our livelihood, for our existence. So we are dependent upon it. Now what happens is this: whenever such a thing exists, that this is the source of your life, the source of your existence, then all things will be drawn to it. Everything will be attracted to it. Every object, as you can see, is attracted to this earth. Do you notice that? Every object which comes within its gravitational pull is attracted to this earth. This is a love relationship. There is a love between the Creator and all the other things. This earth is like the Creator. Is the Creator of all, is the source of life. And so every object which comes within its gravitational pull is attracted to it, just with the force of attraction, which is love. You see? This is the law of nature. But, and therefore, the home of every object is to come down and to rest on this earth. When it rests on this earth, then you can say it has reached its destiny. It has reached its home. For instance, you see this pen in my hand. Its real place, the real place for this pen is to come down, to be attracted by this love relationship, to be attracted, and eventually rests on this earth. When it reaches on this earth, the lover and the beloved have reached to each other. You see? The lover and the beloved have reached to each other. And this is a stage of fulfillment, a stage of pleasure. Pleasure for both. The word pleasure really is, in here you can use it. It's a stage of fulfillment. Now this is a physical thing we are talking about. But as long as my hand is in here, you see my hand here, this hand becomes a barrier for this pen to come down and reach its beloved and rests on this earth. Although the force of attraction still exists, there is a force of attraction already even at this time. With my hand in the way, the earth is still want to draw this to itself. But my hand is preventing it. And this pencil now is a state of deprivation. Because its home is not here. Its home is to come down and be joined with its beloved. Is that clear? This sort of this is a principle of life. Exactly the same thing applies between God and man. Exactly. God is the creator of all. And again, as I was mentioning yesterday, we are not talking of the essence of God. Let us not talk of the essence of God, because we said yesterday clearly there is no relationship between the essence of God and man. It cannot be with anything. There is no relationship whatsoever. But this is God revealed to man. There is a love relationship between the two. God loves to draw a soul to itself just as much as this earth loves to draw this pencil to itself. But men have many barriers in between. Many barriers. We all have barriers. Barriers of veils and barriers. Barriers of, for instance, prejudice is a barrier. It prevents people from recognizing and coming down and becoming united and becoming attracted to their Lord, to their God. Tradition is another barrier. People are born in a tradition and die in the same tradition. It's like being born in a prison and never see outside the prison, and then you die in the same prison. This is what most people are like today, tradition. Maybe in this country you don't have so much attachment to tradition, but there are countries in the world that I'm more familiar with where tradition plays a tremendous role. You don't do anything except what is tradition. There are other barriers. Pride is a barrier. Many barriers. Pride. You become proud of yourself and your accomplishments and your knowledge and your quality and your accomplishments. This is a barrier. Knowledge could become a barrier. Again, because it gives birth to pride. So you see, all people in the world, their soul, there is a force of attraction between them and God. Always God wants to draw them, and that force of attraction is there, but these barriers prevent them from coming and becoming united with their God. Now, the act of teaching, which only a Baha'i can do, is to remove these barriers one by one. And when the barriers are removed, what happens? All the barriers are removed, the soul is attracted to God. And he says, I believe. That moment when he says, I believe, as we were talking about it yesterday, you know, the spirit of faith being born, is when the lover and the beloved reach each other. And this is a state of pleasure. Pleasure. Pleasure for God and pleasure for the soul. Because man and God are the opposite things. And in this life, when two opposites are reaching each other, this is a state of pleasure. It's like the North Pole and the South Pole of a magnet. They're attracted. So you see what teaching is? When you teach the faith, you bring pleasure to God. It's the most meritorious of all things. It's an act of devotion to God because you bring a soul to its God. This is the purpose of teaching. This is the main purpose of teaching. Well, of course, as a result of it, our numbers will increase. That is secondary. Then we can build the institutions of the faith. But therefore, teaching, friends, it's a spiritual act. It is not just something I'm going to teach the faith because the NSA tells me to do it, or because the counselors tell me to do it, or because the House of Justice tells me to do it. But teaching is an essential part of the life of a Baha'i. And it is something that we all will have to be engaged in. There is no question of anybody becoming, if anybody does not teach the faith, well, you'll have to think about it yourself. It's like a person who eats the food, he reads the writings, he may know a lot about the faith, he says his prayers, but he is not serving the faith. Well, you remember I was telling you about this man who eats his food and he doesn't do anything. What happens to him? Well, this will happen. We will not be excited, we will not be able to do anything in life. Teaching is not something that anybody can say, I am too busy for it, really. Except in certain exceptional cases. Very, very rarely you come across exceptional cases. There are, of course, places now that people are prevented from teaching. For instance, if you're living in the Holy Land, you don't teach the faith. But in this day and in these and all over the world, really, teaching is the most important aspect of our life. If we look upon the writings, we find that Baha'u'llah has enjoined on all to teach. I will tell you, our daily life often prevents us from really getting engaged in teaching the cause. Because we are so busy in our life, so busy, we have to do so many things. Even we have to do so many things for the faith that we have not time to teach the faith. And I think this is a very wrong way of approaching it. In fact, I remember some years ago, one of the National Assemblies told us in Europe that we had appointed one of the believers who was a marvelous teacher to become a board member, auxiliary board member. We appointed him as an auxiliary board member. And after a few months, the National Assembly wrote to us and said, what have you done? You have made him an auxiliary board member. He was one of our best teachers. And now he doesn't teach the faith. Can you imagine? This is very wrong. In fact, one of the first things we say to our auxiliary board members all over now, at least I always advise them, if you want to do anything, you must be teaching the faith yourself. It's no excuse because I'm a very busy man and I must not teach the faith. Teaching the faith is for everyone. We found in our home that we're very busy, and myself and my wife, but we have to teach the faith, no matter how busy you are. You have to teach the faith. You cannot have an exception. There is no exception. This is the most important function of a Baha'i. And teaching is a personal thing. Unfortunately, things are done in the Western world very impersonally, and we have got used to the idea of teaching in an impersonal way, which will never be right. You have to teach on a personal level. We do most things in life impersonally. Have you noticed that? I don't know what life is like here. I'm not familiar with America. But I know in Europe, if you want to do anything, you won't put your name down for it. You give a box number in the newspaper so that nobody will recognize you. You know, it's impersonal. You don't say anything you want to do. You put a notice in the newspapers, you want to sell something, you want to buy something, you want to see somebody, you put a box number. Even when you want to fight with somebody, you don't fight him directly, you employ a solicitor, a lawyer, to fight for you. You see, everything is done impersonally here. But teaching has to be done personally. You have to come in contact with the soul. You have to love him. You have to then look into his eyes and love him with your heart until